So I have the shortest trip to get here of any of you. That's good. I'm also in between you and your next caffeine fix. Not so happy about that. And I am here as the buffer in between Intel and AMD. So we have today seen a variety of research subjects covered, and in as much depth as anyone can do in 25 minutes. And I found them fascinating. I'm going to give an overview of what we do at the University of Arizona, but it'll be more shallow and wider because I want to cover a range of the things that we do and give some idea of how you can support multiple disciplines and multiple types of workloads on a single cluster. So we have the one cluster. We have a couple of other lesser ones, but we do our primary work on Ocelote. So it's Spanish for ocelot. It's a cat. We wanted to give it a name and identity so people could relate to that. So it's not as big as the University of Bristol, and I'm kind of bummed about that because here I am in second place, and who wants to be second? But 11,000 cores is significant, and that much memory. When we do tours of our data center, I kind of point out that, okay, let's round it up to 12,000. So that's about 3,000 laptops for the users who come in. And you heard from Joseph before about trying to relate users to HPC. So if you consider 3,000 laptops in one room, that's about the performance that we have for getting work done. And if you look at that much memory, that's the equivalent of about, say, 10,000 laptops that have 8 gigabytes each. We also point out to them that if you look at a single node, and we have the same kind of ones as they do at Bristol are very similar, you look inside and you see what's basically a PC. And there are 2 sockets. Each one has 14 cores, so that's quite a few. And there are memory DIMMs. All right, so there's 192 gigabytes of memory, but these are still just memory DIMMs. And in the back is a hard drive. In the front, which you don't see there, is a couple of interface cards. So it's very much like a workstation or a PC. So what makes it a supercomputer is that it's busy. Most workstations or lab servers are busy maybe 20% of the time. Ours is busy 80% of the time. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Those 11,000 cores are cranking away at jobs. I just looked about half an hour ago, and this cluster Ocelote has 1,200 jobs running. So that represents the work of probably, say, 50 different researchers. Some of them are running 1-core jobs, but hundreds of them. And others are running hundreds core jobs, but only one of them. And we support the range. We also have a number of GPU nodes. We have 46 P100s and 15 K80s, the prior generation. So similar to Bristol. And I'm sort of wondering, having seen Simon's presentation and the similarities that we have, is there sort of a common understanding of best practices? And I don't know if we formally decide together what that's going to be, but it turns out that there's a sort of commonality in how the systems look and how they're architected. Storage is somewhat similar again to Bristol. So we have shared storage for the whole cluster. Some of it is free, which is centrally funded. And some of it they can pay extra for. The rental rates are relatively low. To make it all work, we have software. So our policy is if they request software and it's reasonable to install, we will. Sometimes the software is specifically designed for a workstation and it requires root access, so it has to be installed into the root operating system. So we just turn those away, but for the most part, we do what we can to help support the researchers. So here's some of the examples. This first one is computational chemistry, but it's also an example of cross-discipline. So this particular researcher, he was one of the first ones to use GPUs intensely. And he found when he used the GPUs for the code, it would run, instead of 8 days, it would run in 1 day. Or they did it in a different manner, and what used to take 8 compute nodes could run on 1 node with a GPU. So economically, that was really good. Productivity-wise, it was very, very good. And he's doing things that are large. When you're talking about millions of atoms, simulating that on a workstation just doesn't happen. You have to have a large system to do that. And when you have multiple nodes, you can do multiples of these jobs at any one time. Something that's not done enough, but it's done in small parts, is performance optimization. So at the national labs that you've been listening to already, they do a lot of optimization because they have a very valuable resource and they have very large projects to do. But what really happens at universities a lot is that a researcher will have a postdoc, someone go to a C programming, come up with a code 8 years ago, and it produces A dot out, and it's really good, and they don't change it because they don't know how, they're not focused, they don't really interested in making things run better. So now there's interest in having the disciplines get together. So this is computer science working with people doing MRI imaging. And MRIs are getting more dense in data volume output. And so you have to do things better. So just by parallelizing MATLAB, you get a big boost. And then if you use Julia, you get an even bigger one. And when you get 80x performance improvements, that is a huge win for everyone involved. And so we're trying to encourage more and more of this work to bring disciplines together. So 50,000 people more die every year of colorectal cancer. If you can understand why some people get it and some don't, you've learned a lot. So this researcher studies the microbiome. That's the viruses, phages, bacteria, all that live inside your gut. And their process is quite elaborate. So they do, if I can remember this right, they do sequencing, then trimming, then something, then filtering, and then when they got to the end, they've got their results. So what you have now, especially in bioinformatics, is this workflow that's being processed. And again, in Joseph's one, you remember the chart he showed with all the different pieces that come together? You had Free Surfer, all the other programs, they go together and they produce the output. So if you can encapsulate that whole flow and put it in a job, or let's call it just a workflow, and then you can transport it from one cluster to another to run your workflow in different places, it's incredibly beneficial. And so the answer to that is containers. And so we're supporting containers. The big one, especially in bio field, is Docker. Docker is just simply huge. It plays in the enterprise world, but it also plays a lot for especially bioinformatics. We don't support Docker natively because it's a whole subject, but it doesn't play well in HPC because of the shared environment. So we have Singularity. So what we encourage is users to create a container. Either we can help them, or they'll create it where they have root authority, and they can run their Singularity containers on our system. It has so many wins for different areas that it would take me more time than I have to go over it. But if you're curious, you can ask me. Singularity is a big player in what we're promoting. So we have worked something out with NVIDIA where they're helping others too, not just us, where they have packaged a lot of codes, especially the machine learning, deep learning codes, and you can pull them down. And so I can pull them directly into a Singularity container and then put it in a shared space. So I have TensorFlow, Caffe, Keras, PyTorch, maybe a couple of others. And they are updated monthly or every other month. And then I just bring down the latest one because these change constantly. And if anyone's ever tried here to install TensorFlow properly and not just grab the binary from Python, it's extremely difficult, a lot of dependencies. So NVIDIA's already done the work and I just bring it in. It's a container and users can have at it. Precision medicine, when I put this one on, and then it's already been brought up twice. So it's like, okay, great, this is good stuff. So I won't really go into what precision medicine is. You get that. It's like everyone is different, and if you give all people who present the same symptoms the same treatment and the same drugs, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 will get really, really sick. If you ever watch TV commercials and you got to wade through the drug commercials, and they tell you you may be prone to, and then they talk really quickly about 20 different things you could get, including often the thing that you were there to try to get cured from. So precision medicine means you can deal with that 1 in 100 case individually, and that person will not get those side effects because they are different and their genes are different. So the key here, the one word to look at mainly is the last one in the quote, is correlation. A lot of this is statistics. So he's looking for statistically significant correlations. There is a cohort of people in Tucson who have been studied for about 20 years, and they're looking at them particularly as to whether they get respiratory illnesses like asthma. So you can do it with statistics, you can do it in an Excel spreadsheet, but anymore that doesn't cut it anymore. If you want to get into, well, in this case it's serum biomarkers, you can't just do that on an Excel spreadsheet. You have to have the computer to do it. And again, this is looking at correlations. So their methodology is called LASSO, L-A-S-S-O, and they do it on the supercomputer because that's the only way that they can run the correlations and come out with something statistically significant for this group of people who are, some of them, getting respiratory ailments. So it turns out that the Ashkenazi Jews are a very good subject matter for homozygosity, which has to do with how genes get passed on and how genes sort of go awry when you pass on from one generation to another. But the point here is that this researcher, she didn't have funding, so she gets a free allocation of resources, and she will go wherever she can to exceed and other Jetstream she uses. But she has run hundreds of thousands of jobs on our cluster, and each of them is one core. But by enabling her to run hundreds of thousands of jobs, she's getting her work done. So then to something much bigger. So that was one core, 2 or 3 gigabytes per job. Then when you look at the southern oceans, it turns out that the southern ocean below South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, South America, Chile, is where most of the carbon gets absorbed into the oceans. Over half of the carbon uptake is in the Southern Ocean. So they put floats down there. And when it ices over, they sink. And then when the melt comes in the spring, summer down there, they pop up to the surface and submit data. So there's tremendous amounts of data that's being submitted. And the research is running jobs on the cluster Oslote, and he was running 3.3 terabyte jobs. He's changed his workflow now. Now he's running 1,500 gigabyte jobs. So those jobs are going on at the exact same time as the one core jobs. Now we're getting to Debbie's realm, which she likes. So astronomers tend not to have the benefits of computational chemists, where there's lots of codes available. NAMD and VASP and GROMACS, LAMPS are all available, but they really are not the same kind of things. So astronomers are often good C programmers, and they're good at MPI. And if they can make their MPI efficient and have linear scaling, then they can run really large jobs. So this one ran on GPUs, and he used that many cores. For each job was a couple of weeks. And then this one is kind of our local record one for size. This researcher is only limited by our policies. We weren't allowing any one job or any one group to use more than 1,300 cores out of the cluster. But we changed the policy for him, and because it seemed like it was going to work. So now our limit's 2,000. So he's going to be running 2,000 core jobs for, instead of 7 days, it'll be about 5 days. So he'll get his work done faster. And using 48 nodes and 1,300 cores is really a lot. However you look at it, that's quite large. I guess the nurse people kind of go like, yeah, we've done that. But we're a university, and national labs, the national accounts like nurse, those are the next scale up from us. So that's, I think, useful to be able to run something of this size at the same time that we're supporting the users who are running very small things. And all of these jobs have to play together, and our schedulers are key to that. Thanks to Victor and Altiuk, they helped sponsor us to be here. And our cluster manager software, Bright, that we use is key for keeping our cluster efficient and being able to update it and provision new nodes, do all of the kind of work we have to keep the cluster running. So usability is a big thing. When you deal with researchers who are really new, they're undergrads or they're just freshly minted with their degrees, a lot of them, surprisingly, their notion of compute is this. This is me swiping my cell phone. That's what they know about compute. Some of them have laptops. Okay, so a laptop's useful, but a laptop's 4 cores, and it's GUI, it's point and click. You might have a touch screen where you just kind of poke at things and they do what you want. Typically, HPC has been command line interface, and that's just very unnatural to people who have grown up with new processing types. So we're trying to help with that. So the S on the left is Singularity, so that's support for containers. The TensorFlow one, that's machine learning, so that's where we've got the code from NVIDIA. And then Jupyter, we're trying to make things more web-friendly. So we have a web interface. I guess you might be able to see that. So you log into it. So you go to a web browser and log in, put in your credentials. And then you can go to the file browser. It takes you to your home directory or your extra storage space that we've allocated them. So they've got access to their directories. They can click on something and do upload or download, move their files back and forth between their workstation and their cluster, which is so much nicer than having to do SCP, file name in, file name out, or the host. And then they run their, in this case, this is Python. And so they run their commands, they produce their nice graphs, and it saves it in a notebook. This is starting to become a popular source of instruction. There are a lot of classes now that teach using Jupyter notebooks because you've encapsulated the instructions from the professor, the data, the workflow, the output, and your output data is all encapsulated there, and the class students turn it in. This is exactly the same for research as well. Now they can take their research and share it with collaborators. When it's published, the results are available. So Jupyter is a big win, and it's very popular. And so now we have it supported directly on our cluster. So the commands that are run there are actually being run directly on the cluster. And then we support users going to the national sites. So we've had people running jobs on Titan and bridges at Pittsburgh. San Diego is quite popular. The WRF weather forecasters go to NCAR. And I know there's some that have used NERSC and used Cori. So we encourage them to go that when they need something bigger. What you haven't heard me mention, and something that when you look outside on a typical Tucson day, is you don't see clouds. And when you look in our data center, you don't see clouds either. You do in the enterprise. That's all cloudiness, very, very. But we don't support it because we can't or won't. It's because we don't really have the use case. And without getting into it in great detail why we don't, or why HPC doesn't always work well in the cloud, we can support that, and we will. But it would be those kind of bursty things where someone wants to use 2 million CPU hours in a month, and they have direct funding to spend that at Amazon or Google. So we can do cloud work, but that's something we haven't done yet. And we don't do private cloud yet, although we could. Again, our cluster software manager, Bright, can do private clouds or public clouds. So we could burst if we had to, but we just haven't had that need yet. And I have a couple of minutes left, so you could ask me questions if you like.
So I have a question, and this is for you and for Simon, because I have my own personal biases. And, you know, I think local university HPC centers play a very unique and important role because you're there to work with the researchers and the students. And there's always this issue, I think, and maybe I'm not asking the question, but you know, Simon pointed out HPC isn't IT, and then yes, you can go to NERSC and you can go to SDSC and so forth, but they're not local. So would you guys care to comment on that?
So in our case, Being local means that we can directly talk to researchers. They can come and talk to us. Okay, so I guess I should start with the most obvious things. Because much of our compute's centrally funded, it's free. So we try to tell users it's free. It's there and it's free. You have 25,000 CPU hours for free. You don't have to pay for that. You don't need a grant for it. If you are doing grant application, you come and do your proof of concept, and when you submit your grant, you say, I have already proven that I can do this workload. I just need funding now to scale it. So that's part of the local benefit. And we are getting into more and more training, how to teach users to go from the basics of command lines to Python to data science. We have next week a 2-day workshop from NVIDIA. They're coming and training on machine learning and deep learning. So that's local. We're bringing expertise in. And then what we want is for the users to share with each other. So that's the cross-discipline. And you don't get that sharing across disciplines as well when you're scattered across the country.
And one other comment along that. When you say teaching users, you're teaching faculty as well as students.
Yes, that's right. So for example, next week in that workshop, there are undergrads, grads, postdocs, graduate students, and faculty, and some staff, like the IT managers who are going to be attending the workshop. So yes, lots of teaching needed.
Question.
Quick question. You mentioned that Singularity was your choice for deployment of Docker. What's the reason there? What's the limitations you find for Docker versus Singularity?
Okay, so the question was about Singularity versus Docker. So it's about escalation of privileges. So Docker has been considered as insecure in a shared environment. If you're an enterprise, you own your Docker image, and you're not going to be escalating privileges outside it because the program is inside and you are not inside. Whereas in research, you are inside your container. So you have to have a secure environment. And Singularity was specifically written for HPC.
Any other questions?
Has Arizona participated in Campus Champions or Campus Bridging through Exceed? I'm just curious about your relationship with Exceed and how that's benefited or not.
So for our relationship with Campus Champions, actually there are 4 or 5 of us in the research computing who are Campus Champions members. And in fact, Rick, who's here, I think he stepped outside, he helped with a conference call today. So we're a big believer in Campus Champions for sharing ideas, sharing common pain, and for directing resources. So we find out that there is, I don't know how many of you knew, but like at Exceed, where you can run your compute on scale, they have a program called ECSS. And these are experts in the domains. So you want to do some cosmology, but you don't really know how to do the compute part of it. You can use their experts. They will work with you to create the compute to run on the Exceed resources. So not only are you getting free compute time, you're getting free consulting with it. So it's a wonderful resource.